That should be right. Am I centre stage? I think I need to move this way just a little bit. Lovely. Let's get going then. So make yourself comfortable. Hello. Usual starting routine, just rubbing your hands together. And then starting on your face, gently tapping. Over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder. The side. Upper part of your chest. Belly. And then your legs. And then feet out, settle back, and as always, everything that we do should, if you like, engage mind and body. So that feeling of just sort of sinking back into your chair that hopefully is becoming a familiar feeling to you should be matched, if you like, or paralleled by the dropping of your weight, sorry, by the dropping of your thoughts into your body, a sort of funneling downwards. Meditation teacher once used the image of getting a jar of muddy water, you put it on a table, and after a little while the mud settles and the water's clearer. So we anchor our thoughts into our body, just noticing whatever there is to notice in the first instance. Remember, at the start, we're not trying to change anything other than things we need to change to feel comfortable. And just really hardwiring into our mind and body the pathways for your attention to go through, and that would involve the nervous system and other things, and just a memory of how it feels to get that sense of settling. It's often something that we lose, I think, and you know, a lot of these terms like centering and relaxing and so on and so forth are all very well, but if we don't have some kind of memory of them, they're just abstract, they don't mean anything, you see what I mean. And then coming to the upright position. It was interesting that in one of my more advanced classes last week, I did quite a lot of stuff on stability, balance, if you like, I prefer the terms stability, and kind of like, you know, about standing on one leg and all those kind of things. Somebody contacted me after, he's been training with me for some while, and he said, you know, he said, it finally clicked. And I know you've said it all before, but it, you know, kind of like, I actually managed to drop my hip. And suddenly, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get it all the time, but you know, saying the same things over and over again, we pick these things up gradually. I think I have an idea that we actually properly hear things when we're ready to hear them. So, you know, if you feel, if you suddenly think, oh, yes, and then you think, oh no, he said that before, why didn't I get it? It was because you had other things that you needed to think about, if you see what I mean. So it takes time, it takes patience, it takes practice to do it. So in the upright position, a little bit of your weight forwards. So you've tilted forwards very, very slightly. About 2/3 of your weight back in your hips and buttocks. And as always, that's a very subtle feeling, particularly in your legs. As I was saying earlier, it's kind of, you have to work quite hard to feel this. One thing that can help is if you raise your heels for a few moments, because that then you'll feel the pressure in the balls of your feet a little bit more strongly. And then as you slowly lower your heels, that feeling drains away a little bit, but there's still a remnant of it, and that becomes part of the background. And then bring your attention to your hips and just let your hips relax. It's amazing how even in a chair we can hold ourselves in a certain position, because it's actually quite hard work to do this, and it can be quite frightening in a way, because we're so used to this feeling of holding ourselves, and when we do this, it can feel almost afloat and adrift. But in time, we get used to that, and then we find what's underneath that. And what's underneath it is this denser, stronger quality in our lower body. So everything from the waist downwards, really, lower back, hips, buttocks, legs, feet, all kind of springy but dense, almost like you're sitting on one of these, these big blue balls that you get in gyms, for instance, or a very springy chair. You might lower yourself onto it a bit tentatively to start off with, but then as you relax into it, you think, oh, actually, it's quite nice. And that creates a space in your upper body. So your rib cage begins to drop down, shoulders begin to drop down. In fact, the whole of the front of your body feels like it drops a little bit, and we get this same denser quality in the middle of our body and our back. And that allows space in the front of the body for breathing and circulation and so on. And again, that's quite a difficult feeling because we're used to holding ourselves up. We just keep coming back to it. And in time, we realize it's not just flopping down, that there is actually a muscle tone there that begins to develop, but it's not tight and hard. So your legs, your hips, your back are the parts of the body supporting the front of your body. And the feeling of your hips dropping back, if you can imagine a line from your hips to your shoulders, from the tail of your spine to the crown of your head, as they drop back, so it's just natural for your body to come more upright. So we start to lose that feeling that we need to somehow strain in our chests and our shoulders just to remain upright. And again, that takes some getting used to, because it feels like sometimes I've had people tell me that they feel as though they're going to fall when they do that. Of course, they're not going to, but that's the sort of feeling in the body. So there's quite a lot to do to change those habits and to get away from those feelings, replace them with better habits. And then turning your head. At the start of the process, actually, well, quite a long time beyond that, in my case, as soon as we stop focusing on those elements, we kind of fall back into the old habits. So again, don't feel that you're somehow failing yourself. When that happens, this is perfectly normal. And like any habit, it reasserts itself. So what we look to do is to replace the old habits with newer, more positive habits. Even a simple movement like this, you may find suddenly your shoulders are tightening up or something like that. Then the shoulders themselves. Feel the rib cage opening out and folding in, as though the bone down the middle of the sternum is like the hinge of a folding door. So it's really, I say this is the shoulders. The shoulders are being moved by what's happening in your chest and your upper back, rather than straining in your shoulders. And then go forwards. That, in theory, leaves the shoulders very smooth in their movement because you're not having to strain. So now when you drop your hands down to your sides and you rotate, you're rotating in your shoulders again. So it's those same areas of the body. Think of the big muscles of your chest and your upper back, moving your arms for you. And it's an interesting thing to notice, because some of you have heard me say this before, but sometimes people say to me that they have difficulty, for instance, or opening jars or something like that, because their wrists are weak. And the truth is that wrists tend to be a weak joint anyway. But here, we're causing the wrist to rotate through these big muscles, the pectoral muscles and the big trapezius at the back. So it ends up being a lot stronger. And then winding around. And again, this use of the body, more connected, more parts of the body involved in just simple actions like this, is a habit that we begin to build. And then back the other way. And rest. I remember a few years ago in a martial arts class, we were doing some conditioning exercises that involved two of you on either end of a big bench, lifting the bench up and lowering it down. My teacher said to me, don't bend your knees, don't use your legs. And I had to stop and think, how do I do that without some kind of connection to my legs? And so it's quite difficult after a while to isolate a part of the body. Now tilting forwards and backwards. Weight going into your feet and then back. So you go from about 1/3 of your weight in your feet to maybe half or a bit more. And you think about, particularly your ankles and your knees, their joints, and they just bend in a little bit, they flex, and then extend. And when they do that, certain muscles are being drawn out, expanding, and then they'll just quite naturally contract, and same in the other direction. So the same thing in the muscles of your lower back. So again, the act of your upper body coming upright is actually powered, if you like to think of it like that, by this elasticity and these natural responses in the muscles of your legs and your lower back. So a good physical connection, and that will lead to a connection in the movement itself. As you get away from the idea that you have to strain in your back to make this movement, the spine is released and floats a little bit. So all these physical things lead to an awareness of that third element of movement, of energy through the body. These are what are sometimes referred to as the three jewels: body, mind, and energy. And really what we're looking for is that area where they all meet and overlap. Now turning slightly in your hips, waist. And then in the other direction. And out. We can also use our awareness and create an image. Imagine you're doing this in water, or somehow there's some kind of soft resistance, and that will have the effect of making the movement feel stronger. That would be both a kind of physical and, if you like, an energetic thing. All of these things that I'm talking about are ongoing processes. It's not something that you do and think, oh, I've done that, now I can do the next thing. These are the kind of processes and qualities that we want to develop all the way through our practice. And then back the other way. So the different exercises are there in a way to help us do that. Come back to the center. And this feeling, the label I like to use is this equilibrium. The Tai Chi term is central equilibrium. And this is a feeling that we want to become very familiar with. We feel it most strongly in this position when we say go forwards or move one leg or something like that. There's maybe less of a feeling, but it should still be there somehow. Now, raise one knee, then your toes, push out, lower your toes and push gently into the ground. So imagine you're doing this on soft sand, and what you're going to do is you put your foot out, lower it down, and then just press in a little bit. It shouldn't be a strain, so that your contact with the ground is a good one. Chances are the ground beneath your foot won't yield, so the softening has to be in the sole of your foot. And then on the other side. So that softening in the sole of your foot, something I notice about myself is sometimes I can be walking along and I'm kind of holding my toes tight or something like that. I have to remind myself, actually, I don't need to do that. It's funny, the little habits that we pick up in our lives for various reasons. As I say, it can be quite frustrating, but try not to feel that. So from here. So now as you go forwards, it's your weight going forwards that's applying the pressure to the soles of your feet. As much as possible as we go forwards, we want to feel that the first part of our body that really feels the weight isn't our knees or our thighs or whatever, but is actually that the soles of the feet. And then when we go back, hips and lower back. So all of these things we want to think about at times, and they're all parts of the whole overall picture. And in the end, what we get is a sense of that overall picture, a memory of it, if you like, a recognition of it. So it's when we don't feel that we go back to that kind of analysis. It's like wearing a pair of shoes and just registering that it doesn't feel right, and then looking down and thinking, oh, my shoelace is undone, I'll stop and do it up, or something like that. And then coming over. We extend out and we draw back. And when we draw back, we want our attention to come back to the center part of the body, from there down through our legs into the ground. And this time, turning your hands in, drawing out. So remember, when we moved the shoulders earlier, we found that the big muscles, and not just the muscles, but that whole area of chest and upper back, are very much involved in the movement. If you can make that connection, you'll find that your arms will just naturally begin to flow more. If you don't make that connection, you just try and make flowing movements with your arms will get tired very quickly, in my experience. Now imagine that you've got that big ball that I mentioned earlier in your arms, and what you're going to do is you're going to really try and squeeze it in. This whole area is part of that movement. So again, we have this very subtle conditioning of the body, developing this quality of internal strength. One more time. And think about the transition to pushing a wave. From here, do the same thing, but instead of your hands facing inwards, they rotate and push outwards. Here, as you sit back, I'm exaggerating now, but you see my elbows coming out, not behind the body. I squeeze in, so I'm using the muscles of the chest, the energy of the chest. Physically, we're using not just the big muscles, the obvious muscles for a movement like this, but postural muscles and so on, tendons, ligaments, fascia, even the bones themselves, because remember the bone is living tissue and hopefully can have some kind of movement within the body. They all contribute to this stronger feeling, they're all part of that stronger feeling. And then hands twisted. It's very hard to maintain those images. So this again is where the mind training element is so very important. To be able to create an image and have it running kind of in the background, as it were, while we're trying to work out the complexities of different exercises. So things like the movement in water is fairly constant. Turning your hands out. And now, bringing your hands in, pushing up, and pressing down. Try and make use of the same connections in the body. So your hips are pushing down, your feet are pushing down, but instead of alternating from one to the other, what you're doing now is you're pushing through both at the same time. So you get that feeling of a lift, a movement upwards through your body. And then changing to the wild goose. With enough practice, you'll find that things like that pushing down through your feet and your hips, if you focus on it enough, then eventually you get to a point where you no longer have to consciously think about it. It's there operating for you. This is something that we do all the time. If you've ever bought a new DVD player or some kind of device that has a remote control, start off with, you have to think, oh, here's the remote, which way round do I have it, which buttons do I push? A month later, if you keep using it, you just pick it up, push the button and get on with doing whatever you were doing with it. You don't need to think about it anymore. The repetition is the key there. Part in the clouds. And then dragon plucks the stars from the sky. It's very normal, I suppose. The habit would be that if we want to lift the arm, this happens first. See how my shoulder's gone up. And that's definitely something we want to avoid. So imagine somebody standing behind you, and what they do is they put their hand and press very gently, and then you lift your arm. So you're trying to find, if you like, alternative ways of doing this. You might even want to try putting your arm there. Sometimes that can work. You won't get the same flow, and you might feel, as I'm feeling at the moment, a kind of muscle twitching. It's trying to get in on the act, but in fact you don't need it. And then both hands together. Next time we're going to add the turn. Carefully from your hips. A relatively small amount of movement in the middle of your body will produce quite a big movement in your arms. So you don't need to turn a long way. In fact, you shouldn't try and turn a long way in your hips. And just trust that the movement will build. And now we're doing the push out at the end. That middle part of your body, hips and waist, sometimes referred to as the lower dantian, is often described as being like the hub of the wheel. If you put a bicycle and you turn the hub of the wheel just a little bit, by the time that movement's reached the outside of the wheel, the spokes, where the spokes meet the rim, it's much more simply, there's probably some kind of mathematical formula that will tell us how that works. So to get this range of movement with the arms, if we can find the right spot, we can get the movement with relatively small amount of initiating movement. And once again, our posture is correct and everything else is correct, there'll be a natural expansion in the body. So your arms will start to move. This time we're going to change. And then scooping the sea and looking at the sky. Tai Chi, we're told that 4 ounces will move 1,000 pounds. In other words, a small amount of effort in the right place at the right time can have a very big effect. Something that has its roots in the martial element of Tai Chi, but has its uses in lots of areas of our lives, I think. And then grasping the tiger's ears. Now we're going to switch sides. time. And then grasping the tiger's ears. Once more. And then. So Tai Chi encourages us to reconsider a lot of unconscious assumptions we make about how we move, and our posture, and so on and so forth. When I said about your shoulder dropping down when you do grasping the tiger's ears, I was reminded of something not that long ago, 5 years ago maybe, where I was with one of my main teachers and we were standing holding a position and he came up and he started correcting me. He started pushing in there and he said, relax, you need to relax there. And I was like, hold on a second. I said, well, but it's bone. He said, no, you can relax. I said, no, it can't, it's bone. You know, bone is this hard stuff. He said, no, you can relax. You can relax. It's okay. And I'm like, I can't. It's bone. What do you want me to do? You know, melt the bone or something like that. Started feeling quite annoyed at him. But, you know, kind of, we persevered. And then maybe 6 months later, I was doing that and I suddenly felt, oh, actually, it's not sticking out anymore. So it was bone, but actually I was doing something that made it stick out. And so you know, I just assumed it was bone. I can't relax it. But actually he was right. Of course he was right. So lots of things that we do in a particular way, often with kind of like sound reason in the past. We don't really need to. I said about that 4 ounces moving 1,000 pounds. We often think, you know, there's this habit we often have. Every time we go to move, we sort of prepare ourselves for that, we strain. And if you've had if you've had an injury or you've got part of your body that's painful, that can be very difficult. And you have to sort of like steel yourself to it. But remember, if we can find a different way of doing it, we don't have to strain, or we might not have to strain. There's no guarantees here. So we find that different way, of that different approach. We can actually really make a difference for ourselves. Now, go back to just transferring your weight forwards and backwards. This is a vertical rotation in the center of your body. If you imagine that as being like a ball, then the ball is just rotating forwards, moving forwards a little bit, and then rotating backwards. And if you imagine that the ball can rotate in 2 directions at once, we get this movement that we did earlier. Now think about one shoulder, doesn't matter which one. Hold your hand out in front of you, a comfortable position, and just notice the shape that your hand is making. Circular movement. And then as you go forwards, just extend your arm gently. That's all. And as you come back, bend the elbow so the elbow gets bigger. So you can see my elbows getting, bending my elbows gets quite shallow and then quite steep, quite deep. You may even find a similar kind of thing going on here in the shoulder. It's a lot more subtle in my experience. Try and feel that movement in the center of your body. Now, try that on the other side. So first of all, forwards and backwards, get that vertical rotation. Combine it with the horizontal rotation. That vertical rotation is actually in some ways easier to spot when we're in the chair. But it will also be there in the standing exercise, particularly when we move the weight. But not only then. So if you can feel it in the chair, then it's something that you can take. You won't see it happening most times in standing because it's a very small, subtle movement. Hand in front of you. Be patient with this. You'll want to move the hand too quickly. Feel the connection to your shoulder to your hip. And just push out a little bit and come back. And push out. And nice and smooth and flowing in your arm. And then this time come back and then go in the other direction, one hand after the other. Come back to the middle, turn the opposite way. And then let the two movements overlap. You go swinging out, let the momentum just carry your arm around and go the other direction. Stir in the beans. So the forward movement tends to be a little bit more obvious than the backward movement. If I turn around sideways, it's not a very comfortable position for me, but you'll see I go forwards and back. I come back and then I'm already going forwards. So again, those rotations within the body become a lot more subtle. And they're partly imagined, or rather than just one ball in the middle of your body, imagine there's a series of balls all working in harmony together. So you've got one ball for the forwards and backwards movement, one for one hand, one for the other hand, and so on and so forth. That may be too complicated a picture, and it may not be necessary. And then to rest. So that's an example of how we would use images, but it's also an example of how, at a certain point, the image becomes not necessary. What we have physically in the body is the ability to turn, to roll forwards and backwards, and we're not rigid machines, so we can vary that a little bit. But if we use the image of the ball to give us a feeling for the movement, a connection to the movement, it can make it more accessible to us. And as it becomes more accessible to us, we can just let the image go. There comes a point where most images, in my experience, become irrelevant, useless, because they're too complicated. So just coming back to sitting, remind yourself of that feeling of your upper body when it's in line. Should be no feeling front, back or sides of a tightening. A strong feeling of support from the middle of your body, your hips, your legs, your feet. And then once again, rubbing your hands together. Tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder and your arm. The other side. your chest, belly, and last of all your legs. Quite strong on your legs. Really get the blood back into the muscles where you've been sitting for a while, not using your legs as actively. Good. When you're ready, stand carefully. So it was interesting. I was saying about the person who contacted me and said that they found this more advanced lesson about standing on one leg quite useful. And they've been doing Tai Chi for me for a while. And one of the things I was saying in that class is, you know, support yourself with something. I've talked about supporting the chair, but you know, I'm going to move my chair out of the way so I've got more room. But it could be kind of, you know, holding on to a wall or something like that. It's a good example of where something that we think might be for beginners, might be only for people who can't move or something like that, and we get a kind of, well, I don't need that. Why should I need that? Actually, it's not a question of need. In you know, it's not that you have to have it, but it's really, what can I gain from this? And if you think that doing some of these exercises with support is somehow giving in to something, excuse me, consider if you've ever been to a dance studio where they do things like ballet, very rigorous disciplines, very sort of often strong, fit people who are doing it. They'll always have bars around the room, so that if they're trying to practice something, they can hold on to the bar and they can do their stretching or whatever it is they do. I don't know really. So you know, there's nothing wrong with using these. You know, if you want to investigate, well, how do I drop my weight through my hip or something like that? Having something to help you to develop that is not a bad thing. So rocking your weight forwards and backwards in your feet. And when you've got this going, cast your mind back to that feeling in the chair of that I described as equilibrium, or whatever label you put it. Don't get caught up in the word. And if you can't remember that feeling, or if you're thinking, I don't know what he's talking about, the answer is to practice. I can't really describe the whole feeling. You just have to keep going, and then one day you'll think, that's what he's on about. And we're looking for that same feeling standing. So somewhere in that transition from the balls of your feet to the heels, there's this point where you get that same feeling in your back, your shoulders, different, slightly different in your legs, of course. So this is a useful exercise. It's helped if we can let our hips soften, because we want the pelvis to hang down. That's quite difficult. Yeah, I find it quite difficult. So it's like, oh, actually, I can do this. I can use the chair to help me. And that means I don't keep doing this. I can really concentrate on that one feeling of the hips dropping. And if I keep doing that, then eventually it will just happen. So come into the center, listen your hips drop back and push it up and sinking down. So your legs moving your arms, whether you're seated or standing. Hands should come no higher than, if you feel that little sort of notch at the top of your breastbone, it's about where the hands will stop. They won't come up here. They're going above above your chin, you're putting too much effort into this exercise. And then wild goose, same thing here, your hands really don't go any higher than your shoulders. So once again, by adjusting the movement, and in particular by doing a smaller movement, we find ways of moving the arms from our legs that perhaps we weren't aware of before. And then we apply that awareness to something like parting the clouds, where our hands do go above our shoulders. Good. Now, 1 foot forwards. Remember that feeling of just pushing the foot into the floor. So before you move your weight, press down gently into the floor. And sometimes you'll get a feeling of that just drawing you forwards. Gives you a better feeling of connection to the ground. And then your arms following. Fisherman cast the net. Good. Then on the other side, it feels like an awful rigmarole to get that feeling of pushing in. I'm not suggesting you do it all the time, but every now and then have a little think about it, focus on it a little bit. And then your arms. Good. Bring the feet back. Go back to your chairs. I always say to people I'm not a big fan of standing on one leg, which I'm not. But I have to say, in my own practice, for various reasons, I've been doing some quite challenging exercises. And I've been building these up over the last 3 or 4 years, really. I was going through them this morning. They involve a sort of, you have to do this, and then you do this, and then you do this. And I was noticing this morning it was going quite well. And I noticed that one of the things I've been doing is that feeling of really pushing the foot into the ground, really focusing on my foot. And sometimes I was doing that and I was so focused on the foot, I couldn't think of anything else. And I wasn't able to do the exercises. That's quite frustrating, and so on and so forth. And I had a number of wobbles and fell over and rolled around on the grass and so on and so forth. Went through all that kind of process. But what I noticed this morning was I was just doing the exercise and I thought, well, actually, this is quite good. And I noticed that sort of like the foot was making better contact with the ground. All that time of focusing on the foot and not being able to move the arms and so on and so forth had paid off. It just became part of the habit of how I moved. It doesn't mean I don't wobble around sometimes. It doesn't mean I can do it every time. But it's much more part of how I move now than it was 4 or 5 years ago. So we want to find a balance in our own practice between focusing on details like that, but not losing the overall sense of the movement. We don't want to get so caught up with one thing that it just dominates completely. That can be quite kind of off-putting if it goes on for a long time. But if there's something that you want to do and you're not sure what to do, it might be say you're thinking, well, hold on, you're getting really confused with the arms. You will do, because actually it's not the arms, it's this. It's the movement of your weight and the turn in your center. So that's what's missing, not some kind of clever movement with the arms. Because if I hold my hands here and I do that movement, I'm not doing anything at all with my arms, and they're nearly doing the movement. They're doing 90% of the movement. So it's almost like having to find the right question to ask. So a balance between these little details, for instance, for your stability and things like that, I think this pushing the foot into the floor is a good thing. I'm not saying you should do it all the time, but do it a few times each day. And over a period of time, it will build for you. So you have to be very patient with this. If you're impatient, you want to do the arms straight away. My experience over sort of like nearly 40 years, or over 40 years really, I guess now, of doing Tai Chi is that that's the best way to fail. That we need to develop that patience, we need to remember what Tai Chi teaches us, which is the feet and the hips and so on, and so forth. Get those in place, and 9 times out of 10, when there's something we can't do with the arms, it's because those areas actually aren't responding. So embrace tiger, return to mountain, brings your attention back to center of the body, hips, legs, and so on. So and again, that nice feeling of your thoughts settling, all part of the same process. One more time. And rest. Lovely. Thank you very much, everybody. As always, do feel free to ask questions,